Right. I see we have our attendees filtering into the room.
All right.
Give it a more coming in. So, well, we can go ahead and get started if you guys are ready. So to everybody who is taking the time to join us today, thank you so very much. Very excited to bring you this webinar today. We have the great pleasure of two amazing minds joining us. We have both Eliot and Bruce, who are going to share their expertise from the perspective of contracts as well as financial management with you all today. Eliot, do you want to take a second and introduce yourself to everyone?
Sure. For a minute, I heard you say two amazing minds. I was like, okay, there's Bruce, and I'm looking around for the other one. My name's Eliot Wagonheim, as you can see. I've been a construction lawyer for 38 years, which is a larger number than I like saying in public, but I'm in the habit of doing that. And really, what I've spent my career doing is twofold, not only drafting and negotiating contracts, but also sitting in meeting after meeting before we go into trial or before we go in to see an arbitrator and thinking to myself, what do I wish my client had done? What do I wish this company had known in order to avoid the problem that has led us to this point, whether it's arbitration or litigation or just a disastrous project? And that's why I was really excited to have this opportunity to work with ProNovos on this webinar because, look, as I've said before, a lot of times lawyers just are like flowers at a funeral. They just get there a bit too late to do any good. So I love the concept of analytics and everything ProNovos brings to the table so that, yeah, we can actually jump in and help avoid problems before they become problems.
Wonderful. Well,
Excellent.
welcome. And Bruce, you want to share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'll be quick. I'm like you, Elliot. I heard great minds, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I don't know about me, but I will tell you this though. I live and breathe construction, specifically construction numbers. I'm a data scientist, and I've been in this for quite a while, and so I'm heavily involved with contractors, and I focus on two things in construction: protecting profits for contractors and keeping cash moving. Those are the areas that I focus on, and I do this through technology, and I do this through capital. So I'm excited to have this conversation. Sam, I thought it was great when you came up with this idea because we know contracts are so important and there's risk everywhere. So can't wait to get into it.
All right. Well, and my name is Samantha Lake. I'm going to be your moderator today, and keep these two on task and focus. That way, you guys can walk away with understanding the risk from when you first read over that contract to when you're looking at your financials and trying to understand where did we go wrong or where did we go right. So let's jump in. So Elliot, thinking about the life cycle of risk from a legal perspective, when do you see risk typically enter a project, and why is it often missed?
I think risk typically enters a project well before it becomes a project, and this is why it's often missed. So many people take a look at a contract and they just start focusing on the periods and the commas and the semicolons and all the phrasing that they forget the strategic considerations, and they also forget to really tap into that institutional knowledge. So I always ask people about the regret question. The regret question is framed as, what would make me, thinking about a project, what would make me so regret entering into this contract for this project that I would do just about anything to get out of it? And that's a strategic question. And really, it goes back to, in my mind, Bruce can correct me if I'm making a mistake here, but it goes back to analytics, because unless you really understand and unless you have institutional knowledge, not just the guys that sign the contracts, but the people that pull the project out of the ground and are frontline project boots on the ground people, unless you take their knowledge and you can combine it with the analytics of what happened on the last project and the one before that, where did we lose money? Where do we make money? Where do we lose an opportunity to maximize our profit? Unless you can do that, you won't understand the right projects to enter into. Now, other than that, and I'll wrap this up pretty quickly, once you sign a contract, once you look at it, there is often, number one, a disconnect between your bid, what you intend to do, and what the contract language says. And there's often a disconnect between what the contract actually says and what the boots on the ground people understand it to say. And each one of those represents a point of failure from my perspective. But I'd be interested in where Bruce sits on that.
No, it's interesting. When we were talking about this, I kind of thought about how the contract actually creates the border, if you will. And I've always came at this from a numerical perspective. You know, I know what the budget is. I know the things that historically has told us is going to impact and risk our budget. So we are providing warning signs and providing all of the flashing lights to say, hey, you're approaching a red zone. But the contract is what allows you to take the necessary action once you hopefully once you go into the red zone. Elliot, I was telling you about a conversation that I had with a dear friend who unfortunately he was on a project and got drug through the mud on a project, and luckily he knew the language of the contract and what was allowed and what was not allowed in order to not completely lose his shirt on the project. So a great conversation. um Sam.
And well, Elliot, I see here we have lack of communication. And so, I was asking the question about like, all right, do you think that there is a correlation between the people who are executing the contract and the people who are executing the actual project? And I'm curious to know from the audience if we want to throw it out to them, and see if there is a correlation between maybe where some of this breakdown happens at.
Yeah, I know. I think that's a good idea. So if you, I would ask people to put in the chat, first of all, who is it in your firm that really signs the contracts? Is it the CEO, the CFO? Do project managers have that authority? And then after the contract is signed, who is it in your organization that really has the responsibility of making it come to life and finishing and completing that project? And so if you can just put that in the chat, it would give us an idea of how your organization divides those two tasks. But you're right, Sam. I mean, when we look at a lack of communication, it goes both ways. So lack of communication means that the boots on the ground folks often know where the points of failure were, to be able to look and say, geez, I hope we don't do that again. And for every one of those, that should inform what the next contract says, because you should have an escape clause or you should have more flexibility. On the other side, there's a lack of communication from the C-suite that often, and I can see some of these comments coming in, C-suite that often signs the contracts, and they don't really communicate to the boots on the ground folks, hey, this is how we set it up, and this is what you have to adhere to.
Yeah. And I think some of the early responses we're seeing is it seems like more senior people are signing the contracts, and then it looks like the PMs are often involved, and there might be a visibility issue, right, in regards to what's been signed to what the PMs actually receive.
Yeah, there is a visibility issue. There's also those contracts are just chock full of legalese. So sometimes there's difficulty in comprehending it. But here's the thing. A lot of times, in my experience anyway, I'd be interested in what our attendees say. It's the PMs that are responsible for the profit and loss.
Mhm.
So they have to have a clear window into what the numbers are, and how close they're running. And so I know that that's something that you guys work on pretty extensively. So I think that's part of the puzzle.
No, you're absolutely right, and I think Bruce is going to dig into that a little bit later. But um, moving us along a little bit, Elliot, we have this really interesting timeline, and this is actually directly from the software that First Rule has. So do you want to walk us through this a little bit?
Yeah, this is a screenshot from a kind of a crop screenshot from First Rules Contract Manager, and it's a contract lifecycle management tool. The mastery version, the enterprise version is. And up at the top, you see a timeline because it's not enough to look at a contract just in isolation. You've got to set up the project. So, what kind of project is this? Does it have high risk for you, for example? If I've never done a hospital before, I'm used to building Home Depots and big box stores. Well, doing a hospital is a higher risk project. That's different from just the contract risk. So you've got those two dials on project and contract risk, and then composite. And then you can see how the contract lives from project setup through go, no go, triage, doing the negotiation back and forth, which First Rule helps you with, to executing on that contract and then going beyond. But that's the contract itself and evaluating the project. What's not on there and what's really exciting about ProNovos is you really dig into the numbers and you get into, all right, well, the contract says this. As we're making the project go live, as we're pulling it out of the ground, how are we getting paid? Where's the deviation from what we expected to what is actually happening? And so that's kind of makes this a three-dimensional timeline and analysis.
Right. No, that's really interesting. And Bruce, that kind of makes me think about, with how we're helping contractors. So I'm curious to know from your perspective, how do some of these early contract risks show up later in data and reporting?
Hmm. So here's the thing, contract risks doesn't stay hidden. It shows up later in your data, but by then it's expensive, right? Um, so if terms aren't clear up front, you see it mid-project when cash gets tied up and pending change orders.
Yep.
And your whip report shows margin fade, but you don't feel it until it's too late. And I hate that. When financial visibility lags behind project progress, you're reacting instead of preventing. And that's when profit slips. So, I think if we want to catch early warning signs, what we need to do is ensure that we can capture enough information ahead of time around like projects, right? So let's dig into the project manager. Is this project manager capable of executing projects this size? How has he performed on previous projects? And all that data typically is accessible because most contractors aren't starting brand new from an accounting system with no data. That's where ProNovos comes in. You got the data. We mine the data. We show you. And those early risks and warning signs, they're there if you have the compute power and the analytics to show.
And building on that, because it's an excellent point, especially when you talk about change orders and unpaid change orders. In my world, where unpaid change orders become a real problem, is a bit too late. What happens is the home office, the back office sees, well, wait a minute, we're not getting paid on these change orders. Why aren't we? A lot of times, again, in my world, in the contract world, it's because there's a disconnect. We thought the base scope of work was X, but the owner or whoever's higher up on the food chain thought, no, 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 this extra work you think is extra work and for which you're asking for a change order, that's part of your base scope, which means something wasn't clear in the contract. So one side doesn't think it's a change order and one side does. And if you know that this is a problem, if you could look back at the dollars from previous projects and see that, we're really lagging behind in terms of getting paid on change orders, a lot of times you can track that to the specificity with which you are completing your scope of work in the contract. But the only way you often know that's a problem is by looking at the analytics from what happened in the past. Because a lot of contractors tend to use the same description of scope of work time after time after time, and they don't have a red flag until they employ the actual data and figure, oh, we do have a red flag. We're just not paying attention to it.
And I'm sure you find, Elliot, that most contractors, they'll not do the work until they get the signed contract, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
I
You know,
mean, the project that we know it. We have this level of trust, right? Like if
yeah.
I'm a GC and I know something needs to happen, I tell you to go ahead and do the work. You're good for it. I give you the verbal. There's a good faith there, but that's also where problems come in sometimes. I would
Huge
expect,
problem.
right?
Yeah, it's a huge problem. That's why I was laughing because I asked this to audiences all over. I was like, so I'm sure that none of you start any extra work, change order work until you have a fully executed change order. And the room starts laughing because you've got liquidated damages, delayed damages, the project schedule. You want to be a good guy. You want to have a good relationship. So you're like, yeah, we'll go forward and wait for the paperwork to catch up. And that's where problems arise because what the contracts often say is if you proceed with work without a fully executed change order, you may be waiving your right to payment, which means you may be working for free.
Yeah.
And so that's why, first rule is life cycle management. And I know that ProNovos goes through the life of the project. It doesn't cut off when the contract is signed. You actually use the analytics to figure out where the problems have arisen in the past. And that's a big area. The change orders is a huge area.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I'm hearing and, just in our previous conversations is, you know, when risks aren't seen early, you end up dealing with symptoms instead of trying to solve the root of the problem. And so it's almost like you're playing catch up, correct?
Yeah, you're absolutely playing catch up. And it's harder to take a contract that is being looked at as by both sides as being, almost engraved in stone. This is what we signed. And then go back and say, you know what? This is what we should have signed. This is what it should have said. This is what I intended it to be. Because a lot of times when you've got skin in the game, you've got deadlines pressing on you, you've got monetary issues, you don't want to and don't have the luxury of having those conversations and looking back. So really, you've got to be informed at the start before you sign the contract as you're negotiating. What is it that we need to change to lower our risk? And that's what First Rule focuses on. How do you lower the risk? And we've got over 200 videos incorporated into First Rule to show you how to negotiate, how to revise provisions, what the provisions even mean. And the last thing that I'll say on this is I'll go back to the quote from Lewis Carroll. It was the Cheshire Cat actually that said, if you don't know where you're going, any path will do. And so it's great that we can point out risk and negotiation tools and all that stuff. But I really see that the analytics from ProNovos help you chart out, okay, but where are you going? Where is it that you really see the red flags that you've got to make sure going forward we've addressed?
Yeah. That's perfect. And that's a great transition to talking about like the misalignment of information. So I know that something that, First Rule as well as Pronovos does very well is making sure that everybody is working from the same set of information. And so, Bruce, my question to you is what are some of those consequences when the field and office teams are working from different information?
Ah, I love that. So when the office and the field aren't looking at the same information, I think you're just inviting problems. I see it all the time. Production delays, nobody caught, billing windows missed, and actual costs that are nowhere near what was budgeted. By the time leadership knows, the margin's already gone and everyone's wondering what happened. And I think that we as an industry are getting so much better at understanding that we have to address this problem. And there are many technologies out there that's helping with that. I know personally at Pronovos, we wanted to focus on bridging that gap. We wanted to make sure that when you are forecasting, that the forecasts are accurate. When you do forecast, it's feeding back to the office. However, when I started to work and do research with First Rule, I guess that for me, I never thought about how do contract language get back to the boots on the ground. And it was just, again, something that I never really thought about. but because I'm a numbers guy. But Elliot, I'm kind of curious to hear how you view this from a disconnect between office and field.
Yeah, so it's a big issue because, as you know, the contracts are pretty voluminous. And let's take a subcontractor, for example. A subcontractor isn't only concerned with a contract signed by its organization, but very often the prime contract is incorporated by reference into their contract documents, which means the pile got larger, right?
Mhm.
And so you've got a project manager, you've got foremen, you've got superintendents in the project trailer, they're ready to get started. And if you dump, 100, 200, 300 pages on them, and you say, well, the answer's in there somewhere, just go ahead and figure out how to do it, you're going to waste their time. You're going to risk a lot of miscommunications because they're confusing documents. So one of the things that we help to do is, well, there are two things. One is an executive summary. We have reports that really give critical issues on what the contract says so that the boots on the ground folks can understand it. A second thing that we do is we have Martin, our AI assistant, and Martin allows you to ask questions to interrogate the contract. What is my deadline for change order? What documents have to accompany the application for payment? When do I have to put together a notice for force majeure? And Martin, here's the contract. Can you put together that notice for me in full compliance with the contract provisions? That's what AI brings to bear. And I'll just say this, it's not just AI. It's AI that is specifically trained, specifically vetted for the construction industry. It's not ChatGPT, it's not just Copilot. It's something that is trained for the construction industry because boots on the ground folks have to be able to parse through all of those thick documents. And it's really the tutorials that we have, the deep dive classes that we have, Martin that can allow you to interrogate the documents, and the executive summary reports that makes it easy for them to see what the back office just signed.
So I'm curious. I'm sorry, Sam. You're the one asking questions, but I do
No,
have a follow-up question, if you don't mind, Elliot.
no, go ahead.
No, please.
How 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 do most contractors do it um today, like without having a Martin? How do they interrogate the contracts today? And I know it's different for every contractor, but you've been around 38 years, so you've heard quite a few stories.
Well, a lot of times they don't. I mean, so it's funny. I'll tell you one thing. I was in front of a group of subcontractors, and I asked them. I said, "Do you all actually ask to get a copy of the prime when the prime is incorporated by reference?" And not many hands went up. And I said, "Well, can you tell me why you don't ask for a copy of the prime?" And one guy raised his hand, and I'll never forget this answer because it sticks with me. I said, "Well, why don't you ask for a copy of the prime?" And he said, "Because if I asked for a copy of the prime and I got a copy of the prime, I'd have to read it." I was like, yes, you would have to read it. And that's one of the problems that I've seen throughout the years where the C-suite would sign the contract, and even a diligent C-suite would go to the project team and say, here it is, here's the contract. And you'd hope that the project team has somebody who's really good at going through that contract. But the other issue that's faced by a lot of construction companies is they're growing, they're scaling. So
Yeah.
now you don't just have that one person that's been doing this for 10 years, 15 years, either negotiating them or executing on the project. Now you've got to bring in new people with various levels of training, and that means more areas of miscommunication. So it was hit or miss, Bruce. That's really what it was, but you had to rely on fluency in the field as well as fluency in the back office, and that wasn't always the case.
And you're saying now with Martin, I could just type questions and get answers.
That's exactly right. You can type
Wow.
those questions. You can ask, here's my contract. You've uploaded your contract. So you're not, if I went to ChatGPT right now, or if I went to Google and said, how long does it typically take how much time do you have to submit a change order request? I'm sure Google's AI would say, well, in a typical contract, it's X, Y, and Z. But what Martin does is if you upload your contract, it will look at your contract. And so when you say, how much time do I have to do this? Or what are the damages for this? Or what's my warranty? You can link the prime and the subcontract if you're a subcontractor, and Martin will actually go through that and will show you, okay, here's what it says, or here's how to write the notice, and here's an example of the notice in full compliance with your contract. And that's really how AI, construction-focused AI, and Martin changes the game.
I love that. I love that.
As I'm listening to both of you, I think one of the biggest takeaways, Bruce, is I think about often too, with probably some of the construction financial professionals listening in, they're heavily reliant on Excel. And so hearing Eliot talk about the contract and the importance of the contract to the PM, as well as the importance of the financials to the PM, we're giving the PM access to this information, but in ways that is not inherently easy for them to dissect, understand, and put into real world application. And so if there's one big takeaway for everybody here, it's putting tools into the hands of your PMs so that they can do their job to the best of their abilities. You shouldn't be adding roadblocks to what they're doing by making them analyze Excel sheets or going through a massive contract. You should be removing those roadblocks so they can focus on doing what they do best, which is building.
Mm-hmm.
No,
Sorry.
that's exactly right. And I'll tell you really fast. I had a client came to me and they said, "Hey, Eliot, can you review this contract for us?" And I did, and I looked at the contract, but the contract kept referring to Exhibit A. And Exhibit A, because they were a maritime contractor, Exhibit A was written entirely in Norwegian. I don't speak Norwegian. So the client was saying, "Okay, well, what do you think the danger areas are?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know because I don't speak Norwegian." And it's written in there referring to a document I can't understand. And in a way, that's what plagues very often people in the field, because sometimes the documents are so laden with legalese and 19 comma sentences, and they're so thick that it might as well be in Norwegian. And their take might be of only the parts that they understand and not the entirety of the contract documents environment, or they just kind of throw their hands up in a learned helplessness thing. So to be able to break down the contract terms into something that's readily understandable by somebody who didn't have the misfortune to go to law school is one of the critical ways that we can lower contract risk.
I like that.
Yeah.
So I guess let's transition. I kind of just brought up the idea of technology, but let's dig into that a little bit more. So let's see here. So Bruce, let's start with you. How do tools like ProNovos and First Rule help the field and office team share one version of truth?
I remember the first time I heard one version of truth, and it sent chills down my spine because I knew exactly what that meant. But when project and financial data finally live in one place, I think everything changes. The field, they know exactly what the contract says. Accounting knows what's happening on the site. Leadership, they see where risks are creeping in, and everyone's rowing in the same direction because everyone sees the same version of the truth, whether it's good or bad. I would rather have bad news and try to figure out what to do than to have conflicting information and not knowing what to do. That's what tools like First Rule and ProNovos are designed to do. It makes the invisible visible. When you have access to information and everyone has the same access, we can make judgment calls about what the future looks like. I think that unfortunately, when you consider the plethora of information out there, all of the different applications that exist, it creates more of a problem because we have disparate information. To have one central place where we could bring it all together and we all know exactly what that margin is on the project. We know exactly how we got to that margin. I think it's important, not to mention revenue. I know many companies at the beginning of the year, they're forecasting what they want their revenue to be. And that forecast often isn't shared with everyone, but everyone is contributing to help you make that forecast. I think tools like that, I'll also say this. There's this term that I like. It's a very geeky term. It's called data democratization. And with that, what that means is that you're giving everyone information. There are still some contractors believe that they want to keep information close to the vest. They don't want to share it. I do not believe that is the way to grow a construction company. You share it with the people. These are people you hire. You have to, involve trust. And so I could go on, but that's my answer.
And Elliot, from your perspective, how do you see it?
Well, I'll tell you, and I'm going to go because I agree completely with everything Bruce said, but there's one aspect that I want to bring into the conversation that is often overlooked. I've worked with a lot of construction companies in the mergers and acquisition space. So they're being acquired or they're acquiring another construction company. And in the due diligence, what often happens is they're like, okay, well, you've got all these ongoing projects. Have you over invoiced? Have you performed in accordance with the schedule of values? Are you ahead out over your skis? So they're looking at contract risk, but they want some real-time analytics on how much money is left in the project, what's the WIP, what's all of this stuff. And I've seen too many occasions when the target, the one that really wants to be acquired, they're like, I don't know, dude, here are all our contracts. You got to figure it out. I really don't know. And I've seen deals fall apart on this, on both sides. And so one of the things that I was looking at ProNovos for is I was thinking, boy, this stuff would have been helpful in so many of these transactions I had, so that companies could be bought and sold, could evaluate their WIP from a dollars and cents point of view, and not just, well, it's change order number 12 or it's this or it's that. So I see the combination of being able to assess your project and contract risk and make informed go, no go decisions is great. And it really helps minimize risk, optimize profits. But I also see the application of real-time analytics being key to scaling your organization or even exit planning or being acquired or acquiring somebody else if you want to grow that way. And I think that's often overlooked.
So I'm going to throw an impromptu question at you both. So as we're talking about information, the real-time access and the visibility, I can imagine there's probably some listeners today saying like, well, yeah, I give them access. I give them the contract. I give them the Excel sheet. I give them access to the ERP, only specific reports. They don't get to touch my entire ERP, but I give them some of the ERP. But I feel like there's a difference between access and people having the same level of understanding. I mean, Elliot, you have talked at length about your understanding from a legal perspective, and that is very unique. Bruce, you have the perspective of a data scientist, and we know what PMs went to school for, and we're pretty familiar with the curriculum if they're going through traditional university. But yeah, they would take a finance class here or a legal class there, like we all did in college, as our electives. But they probably don't have this deep, in-depth understanding. So I don't know if you guys are comfortable, but can we talk about the difference between access and understanding of both contracts and financials?
Billy, I'll let you go first.
Well, let me just say this, that one of the ways that lawyers tend to spice up ordinary conversations is by using phrases like notwithstanding anything set forth here into the contrary. And you're like, okay, well, we just spelled out in paragraph A all these things, and then paragraph B says, notwithstanding anything else set forth here into the contrary, and paragraph B completely overturns paragraph A. It contradicts it. And so you could give boots on the ground folks access to that contract, but that doesn't mean that they understand what it means and what they have to do bottom line in their job. So to give you an example, one of the most confusing contractual provisions is indemnification. When you ask people, if you ask them in a poll, what's the most confusing provision? A lot of times indemnification will come back. Boots on the ground folks don't need to know indemnification right off the bat. What they need to know is change order, force majeure, warranty, contract sum, contingencies. They need to understand the things that are of bottom line importance. Are there joint checks and direct checks? What happens with the price escalation or supply chain issues? All of these things. So So it's not just a matter of turning over, from my perspective, turning over the entire contract to the boots on the ground team. It's a matter of, first of all, having your organization get in sync, listening to them as far as what do we need to do our job really well and providing that. But the second thing is that if you give them shortcuts and don't make them wade through stuff that doesn't matter to them, you give them shortcuts to understanding what is absolutely mission critical for them, you go a long way towards ensuring that everybody is actually speaking the same language, even if they're not on the same literal page.
Yeah. So I like to add to that as well. And I agree with you 100%. And Sam, you almost make me want to walk back some of the stuff that I just said because of your comment and your question. However, I still believe in data democratization. I believe that you give the right people the right information. So, for instance, one of the things that I struggled with early on when we were building the technology was the idea of from a technology company, we believe that we're SaaS too, so cloud-based. We believe that the longer you stay on a page, the longer that you're interacting, the more valuable we are to you. But that's just not simple. That's not the case. And when we were talking about boots on the ground, they pick the technology up, they make a transaction to get their job done, and they put it down. That's the nature of being on the job site. I understand that. So we had to completely take something that's complicated and make it simple to use. We had to make sure that the language, the terminology is very specific to the understanding of the people that are using it. That's why we have different types of views for different types of users. If I am focused on productivity, you're going to see things that I am comfortable with, productivity rates, number of installs, things like that. I probably shouldn't be looking at gross margins and and earned revenue when I don't understand what it really means or how to apply it to my business. I will say, however, a lot of what we do is centered around education. I cannot tell you how many conversations I've had with executives that talk about revenue. And the first question I ask them is, are you talking about billings or are you talking about earned revenue? Because, even when we believe that we're on the same page, we may not be. So I got to say that when we deploy any type of metrics, we make sure that we give you hover over something and it'll tell you what it means. I believe that the interpretation has to be part of the package, either through formal education, through workshops, or within the actual technology. But it's a very good question.
Thank you. And as you all are both talking, I'm going to share something with the audience. Most of you don't know this about me, but my first career was in training and development. So as I'm hearing Eliot and Bruce talk, I wrote down you need to meet people where they're at. So from a learning and educational perspective, it's important to give them tools. And some people, they're going to be your super users with technology. They're going to take it and they're going to run with it. Other people, it's just going to give them a leg up to have a stronger understanding. They may never be your super users, but they're going to be learning through the process, which Bruce just talked about with even just the in-app notifications of hovering over and understanding the equation. How do you get your over/under billings? So I'm gonna change things up next for our audience. We have two scenarios
But
that
before you do
Bruce.
that, Sam, one thing, while you're doing that, I was just going to ask people if they could put in the chat who in their company is really responsible on a project for project basis for the profit and loss. Do you, if it doesn't work, do you look at your project manager and call him or her on the carpet? Is it the CFO? Is it somebody else? Because I think when Bruce talks about the democratization of data, I think part of that goes to, yeah, there has to be visibility. Because if there's not, sometimes the people that are really responsible as part of their job description for profit and loss and for the dollars don't even get to see the data that's going to drive the ability to make decisions. So I just thought I'd ask people to put in the chat who at their company is responsible for that, even while you're setting up these scenarios.
It's a great question.
Actually going to ask the audience while they're doing that, if there's one scenario over the other that they would prefer to hear, or if we want to put you two on the spot, if they would like to share their own scenario. I think Eliot, you had a phrase early on about, regrets. And so if there's any regrets anybody has that's listening to the webinar of like, I really regret this in this contract, that you would like our experts to talk about from a scenario perspective. We're comfortable putting them on the hot seat, but if not, go to the chat and just put in a 1 or a 2. And let us know which scenario you'd like them to talk about. We do have an early response that project managers are responsible for the profit and loss at Colette's company. So,
Yeah, I think you're going to find that in most cases. But regrets, I love hearing about regrets. I love like just learning. So don't be shy. uh,
I mean, while we wait, if nobody wants to vote on a scenario, Bruce, Eliot, is there a scenario that you guys want to dive into and talk about to see if anybody has any regrets they want to share?
Well, I'll tell you just to tee it up, not necessarily on the scenarios, but when we're talking about the regrets, I ask this question a lot. I ask the regret question. And there are a couple common themes. Well, we didn't give ourselves nearly enough time on the project schedule. We didn't even agree
mhm.
to the project schedule when we signed the contract, and the project schedule followed, and we can't make that, or we have absolutely no contingency, no float built in at all. So it's project schedule.
Mhm.
A number of companies that I talk to, and I talk to them all the time on this, is, well, their regret is that the scope of work in the actual contract differs from the scope of work in their bid, and they never really check that, which goes to, can we get a change order, or is this extra work? Or maybe they didn't know the due diligence requirements that are in the contract, so they can't get a change order for unforeseen site conditions. So you have a lot of those regrets that I see from a contractual standpoint. But the biggest one is, I can't believe we're still beating our head against the same wall. We know we don't do this well. We know
Yeah,
that we have razor thin margins on this. Why did we take this job? Oh,
yeah,
because we just wanted to get something in the door, and we really didn't know what the data said, that no, nothing in the door is better than getting this thing in the door.
yeah.
So one of the big regrets is just not knowing enough about your own experience.
Oh, Elliot, you made me think of, oh gosh, you made me think about and listen, I'm not trying to like shine a light on the software that we have. I mean, I think anyone can get the same data, but there is a dashboard that is focused on profit, and it looks at every attribute about the jobs, and it tells you how well or how poorly you've done on attributes that fit a certain, I'm sorry, jobs that fit a certain attribute, which project managers, what superintendents, what project types, what size projects, all of that. And I'm kind of curious. I want to ask you the question. This will be a feature request if you don't have it in the software, but can can people put like regrets in the software? Hey, I don't want to do these type of things anymore. Or, like I'm sure when they go through the postmortems, they come up with regrets, right? So is there
Yeah.
a place in the software where they could put that?
Oh yeah, we absolutely built in scorecards. So
Nice.
it's not just for the type of project, but it's also for the companies we work with or the team. So for example, you might have this mega contractor that you work with, and you know the team A is great, but I will never work with the executives from team B again. So we can score them, you can score them on 1 star to 5 stars. You can evaluate the risk so that it does capture that regret. It does capture that institutional knowledge of when we don't want to engage. So yeah,
Nice.
absolutely.
Well, in terms
Well,
of the
the audience is,
scenarios,
yeah, I was gonna say they don't seem to have a preference. So I'll let you guys pick on which one we want to talk about, and then
Go ahead,
I'll
Bruce.
just
Go
yeah, I'll
ahead.
just go with number one. I think, so how should that, all right, a project is trending behind schedule. You know, my I believe that if visibility had been in place, that schedule slip would have been caught the moment production started to lag. Instead of learning halfway through the month, you'd have you've had time to pivot. I think that it comes down to just having the visibility and here's what I'm starting to understand. it seems like schedules are becoming less and less favorable. Everyone that's starting a project, they're excited about it. They'll build a beautiful cost-loaded schedule, and then after the third, fourth month, or 25% of the project, the schedule isn't updated. And I think that's becoming more and more common. And so I believe that when you're able to, if I'm a trade partner or subcontractor, most of the time my productivity is aligned to my substantial completion date when I think this project is going to end, because my budget is based on how much labor that I've allocated. And if you go beyond that, either we're going to have a change order, or we will need to ramp up our productivity. But visibility, I believe, is a way to spot flags halfway through the month.
Yeah, and I think that's incredibly important. And then so where Bruce had stopped is kind of where we would pick up a bit, which is, okay, we now have visibility. ProNovos gives you the visibility. What does the contract say you can do about that? Right? So you could go to Martin, the AI assistant, you can say, this is the extreme, but how do I fire my subcontractor? Or how do I supplement my subcontractor's forces? And the contract will speak to that. Well, this is what you have to do. This might be a deductive change order. This might be the notice requirement, et cetera. But again, you don't have to parse through all of those pages. You can actually interrogate the document. And you can do that incredibly fast. Whereas before, really, you either wouldn't be able to do it, or it would take you hours, or it would take you hours and then you'd have to think, well, I might not be right. So then I have to start the lawyer's clock running by calling him or her and saying, look, I know I'm paying you X $100 per hour to do the same exercise I did, but I don't want to make a mistake. So I think that once you have the visibility, the contract allows you to do certain actions, and understanding what those actions can be is absolutely key to moving on.
So, Elliot, we had this test. We had this pilot program, and I thought it was genius. This was around sort of around job reviews. Every month, project managers, they have to go through job reviews and sort of like tell them where they're at on the project. And so we built a way to make it almost like a checkbox, all the things that a PM should know about the project.
Yeah.
And that was good. And we took it a step further, and we said, what if they could press a button and get a narrative about what's going on with a project review? It's almost like an essay about their project. And the feedback we got was, some of the feedback anyway, we don't want to take critical thinking away from our project managers. We want them to understand and do the work. And I'm kind of curious, as it relates to something like first rule, have you ever experienced anyone talking about that?
Sure. I mean, because the contract can only take you so far. What I tell people is the contract is always an exercise in fortune telling, right? If I'm drafting a contract, I'm sitting here a year before any of these events would be triggered. So I can't come up with all of the different scenarios. What I want to be able to do, if in a perfect world, is arm the project team with enough knowledge upon which to make a really good decision. But they still have discretion. So to give you an example, if you know under the contract that you should fire a subcontractor, firing a subcontractor is a pain. Number one, you have project delays because you got to find another subcontractor, get that subcontractor up to speed. Number two, you got a warranty disconnect because subcontractor two is not going to warrant the work of subcontractor number one. Number three, you've got a dispute brewing because subcontractor number one rarely agrees that it was right to fire him, right? So you've got this dispute. So the contract may say one thing, but if you had certain analytics, if you know how the project would go, maybe you are informed that say, you know what, in my discretion as a project manager, the best thing to do is to keep them on to supplement the workforce and keep them on and maybe see if I can get an extension of the project schedule through change order. So there are a lot of different options that open up when you have a 360-degree view of what's actually happening, not just in the contract and not just on the ground, but actually through the financials, which is what you're going to be graded on anyway by the end of the day. So yeah, there's a lot of free will in an environment that seems it's really burdened with regulation.
Yeah.
Well, I know our time is coming to an end, so I do want to wrap up and have time for a few questions. But before we go to the questions, or as I have Bruce and Eliot start answering them, what you're going to see on your screen is a poll, and it's just if you would like to learn more about First Rule and or ProNovos, we can set up meetings for both. But for anybody listening who hasn't quite invested in technology, and you're curious, you just want to have a conversation to figure out, like, what is this? Could it work for me? I can tell you both teams are very, very low pressure. So if you would like to just learn more about both, or if you're more interested in First Rule or ProNovos, you can absolutely indicate that on your screen now. But yeah, it's always worth taking the meeting to learn more if you aren't investing in a technology like this. So I'm going to leave this up and give you all a chance to respond. But before we take any questions, Eliot and Bruce, final question to you. If you had to give one piece of advice to contractors trying to close these gaps from a risk perspective, what would that advice be?
I actually have a question for Bruce that's kind of a follow-up on this, so that's kind of related to this. And that is, I know that ProNovos has a lot of features, right? It's got a lot of, it's very rich in what it can do for you. So when a contractor is new to this and says, look, I do want analytics, what's the best thing? What's the first item of success when you say, okay, when you get started in ProNovos, this is the thing you really should start to focus on because it's an easy entry or it gives you the biggest bang for the buck? What would you say that is?
That's a great question. And I don't want to answer that with it depends, but
Because that's a
most
lawyer's
often
answer.
most often contractors, they are seeking for different reasons. No matter the reason they're seeking, it all depends on the foundation of the data that they're making decisions on. Typically, the very first thing we do is we try to understand how compromised their data is. A lot of data is incomplete, and we've all heard garbage in, garbage out. So what we do is we take them through what is called a project data health. We want to know, based on all the 1,000 projects, what does the metadata say to us about the usability of this information to make decisions? Oftentimes, you'll find contractors, they will do change orders outside of the system, or they don't put contracts in the system. In that case, something like ProNovos may not be as useful for you unless we pull from the source that is housing that information. But that's typically where we start to see if, if your foundation is right. And if it isn't right, we give you a tool that allows you to build the foundation and you can start seeing how well it's coming together. I appreciate the question.
Oh, absolutely. No, that's great. That I could see that being really helpful. Because if you have a bad foundation, you have a bad project.
That's right. That's right. Um, and I'm curious to hear your final takeaway about risk.
Yeah, I mean, I will tell you that, like you said, you hate to start an answer with it depends, but different companies have risk in different places. But one of the things we hear all the time is contractors who understand, look, I know I know that AI can be helpful in contract review. They know that's a thing because AI is ubiquitous. You can't swing a dead cat without hitting an AI solution in any facet of your life. So, but how do we get started? How do we know the good from the bad, et cetera? And First Rule, frankly, had a problem with this because we had this enterprise-wide solution. We have it, and it's great, and it's contract lifecycle management, and it's got a lot of bells and whistles. But people are like, well, I don't understand what AI contract review can do for us. And so what we've launched is we've launched Apprentice, which is it's online. It doesn't require installation, and you can upload a contract and you can interrogate it. You can get a project report, so you can see how AI can really facilitate and streamline the contract review process. And we're just launching it. It's by the end of the month, so we're launching it this week. It's brand spanking new, and I know we can give more information on Apprentice. The other thing that I will say is that we have an open community demo on September 18th. I know that we can follow up with emails and give a link to that. So if you don't want to book just for your company to have a demo, we have an open community demo, and you can hear all about that stuff and probably see what works for you and answer the "it depends" question for yourself.
I love that. What date was that?
September 18th at
18th.
2 o'clock Eastern.
All right. All right. Well, I'll say that for me, the final takeaway is I don't think visibility is a luxury anymore. I think it's a matter of survival. The earlier you see the risks, I believe the more options you have to protect your profits, your relationships, and even your reputation. And I think without it, you're flying blind. The days of being okay to wait weeks, sometimes months, without understanding what's happening on the project are far behind us. The reason why I say that is because your competitors, they're not operating in that way anymore. And pretty soon you're going to hear Eliot say AI isn't a luxury anymore either. It's something that you got to have. And I think that's coming really soon as well. So with that, Sam, I'll turn it back over to you.
No, I think that, and I think this a lot. I think that we get the question, is AI going to replace me? Is AI going to replace people? And I don't really think AI replaces people, but I do think that people that use AI are going to replace people that don't. AI is a great tool, and to ignore the presence of that tool in the marketplace is a mistake. It's a mistake for companies, and it's a mistake for professionals who want to stay on top of their game. So you have to know what's there. Similarly with the analytics that Bruce has been talking about, with the data that Bruce has been talking about. Years ago, you didn't have access to the data, or maybe even a select few had access, and we didn't have the tools for democratization of the data, but we do now. And so you have a choice. You don't have a choice of whether to be affected by it, and you don't have a choice of whether you're losing out to your competitors because they have more knowledge than you do. You just have a choice of whether to utilize the great tools that are out there or not.
Love it. Well said.
That's perfect. Well, I had put out a call for any questions. I don't see any in chat or Q&A, so I would like to thank you both for your time. I don't think it's talked about enough, contracts and the correlation to financial data. So thank you both. For anybody listening, we do have another webinar coming up. So in addition to Eliot, their open demo on September 18th, on September 16th, we have former CFMA Chairman Brad Robinson, who's going to jump on a webinar with us to continue the conversation about technology, but more specifically in how it impacts your WIP and cash flow. So be sure
We love
to
talking about WIP.
Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Thanks, Eliot.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.